Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Outsmart Yourself series. I'm Corinne DeMattis, VP of Sales at Smart, and I'm joined by Ryan Laredo, our Chief Customer Officer. In today's episode, we'll be exploring how to maximize your marketing impact in a post-cookie world. So Ryan, let's jump right in. In a world where privacy is prioritized, how can we build meaningful relationships with consumers?
Yeah, so I think that as an industry, we've all needed to do this a little bit better for some time. The consumers really, really do care about how you treat them as a human being, and privacy and understanding and being upfront with how you're leveraging their data for good and value is what we need to aim at. They want positive experiences, just like you and I, Corinne. Like, we want to see the right color sweater, we want to see the right size shoes, we want to see the best vacation for us. But we also want to make sure that we aren't being taken advantage of when we share this information. And so being forthright about how data is being used on a customer or a consumer basis in the digital space is really where we missed a step historically. And we see, especially with opt-in on iOS 14, that those who have an honest and incentivized even um, articulation of how they're going to use the data from consumers have won. And so I think that marketers can really learn from what is the value exchange and also being very forthright about their dedication to privacy.
Makes sense.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that's fair. I always like to put myself in the consumer shoes because I am probably one of the biggest online consumers. So it's relatively straightforward to think about. I think that transparency around how the data is being used is important. And always some type of incentive. I mean, if they want to give me a discount code for my email and some other personal
Right,
information, I'm all for it.
right, exactly, exactly. I think that incentivization um, that is quick as well or continuous is a really, really important thing for marketers to consider. It can't be a one and done. If you're going to continue to use the data, you need to continue to provide updates on how you're using it, and you need to continue to provide incentives, whether that's coupons, whether that's exclusives, whether that's a party, a party in the location in which you live. Yeah, it can be done in very creative ways.
Yep.
What about creative, Corinne? I feel like it's pretty important in this new world.
Creative is very important in this new world. I mean, we've seen over and over again that creative can be a huge lever for performance. And I think in order for brands to meaningfully rely on creative, that they need to ensure they're testing and learning. So basically this repetitive cycle of introducing new creative into market and then understanding what's resonating, um, which is even more so important as you start to think about all the different platforms that you have to reach consumers on. But when we talk to brands these days, it's interesting because oftentimes they think that the most challenging thing, and it's certainly challenging, but I don't know that it's like the top challenge, is actually creating enough content.
Yeah.
The lifespan on paid social tends for a piece of creative tends to be pretty short because you can't keep showing the same thing to consumers over and over again for a year, especially at the volume you get on paid social. And so that's certainly a challenge, making sure that you have the volume of content that you need. But I think hands down, the biggest challenge is making sure that you're actually getting the right insights and making sure that you don't just understand which creative works well, but understanding which elements or what copy within that creative is actually resonating with your consumers so that you can then take out those meaningful insights and get those back to your creative team so that they can actually put their time and energy as they're building assets into what's going to resonate with consumers. And the way that they should be thinking about it is like, okay, I'm going to find the king or queen creative and then constantly figuring out what's the right strategy to figure out how you dethrone that with a new creative that's going to outperform whatever
Yeah.
you currently run.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting a little bit back to the consumers, people want to see beautiful and new experiences in their social all the time. When we think about where consumer behavior has shifted, it's been a more into platforms that offer more algorithmically tuned, personalized content that's repeating quite quickly and moving on quite quickly. And so, in order to resonate, um, understanding that the consumers expect for brands to fit into those environments and even stand out, that means that there's a whole lot of creative tonnage that needs to come behind it. And certainly with the insights and understanding the elements, that's a level of data that doesn't require any of the things that have previously been necessary for a more personalized experience, um, because you're able to really test those different elements with more macro level data and make an impact, stand out again, and land in a feeling with consumers, one that sticks for quite some time. But doing it well and keeping up with that is certainly a challenge, certainly a challenge.
It
If there's
is.
a place that can help with that, I don't know.
Especially these days. And like that's the other thing too. I think there's this broad concern, or I guess just question around how you can still personalize creative despite the fact that you have like a lack of intent data. And what brands should really be thinking about is how they can leverage the other types of data available to them. And quite frankly, there's loads of it. I think that, we have loads of examples at Smartly. We work with a bunch of different free APIs where brands can access things like weather data, pollen count, sports scores, sports schedules, and then leverage that broader data to actually make it specific to the user. So if you think about New York this week, for example, it was freezing. And so for me to see an ad for ice cream, probably not overly appealing. Actually, I'm going to use another example because
I'm like,
sounds,
ice cream,
ice cream always sounds good. So that's probably the worst example possible. Let's use iced coffee. Iced coffee yesterday, like my hands probably would have froze off, not overly appealing to me. I probably would scroll right past it. But when it's really cold outside, seeing an ad for hot coffee, for example, is much more appealing and makes it feel relevant and specific to me as a user. Even though you don't know anything about me, making it based on the context or the surroundings makes it at least a little bit more relevant. And then honestly, even just calling out location or stores near you, inventory near you is going to make it feel a little bit more personal than just blasting your entire consumer base with one general message.
yeah. And advertising has been around for quite some time. I'm sure you knew, and well before the digital age, and it was done well, and it was because it was beautiful, and some of it was broadly impacting, and it certainly wasn't changing every 10 seconds. But I think that we can learn and incorporate from things that have worked in the past, and how you measure impact doesn't always mean you need micro. And of course, you can be um, potentially more connected with very personalized creative, but it doesn't have to be based on what your birth date was or what you bought yesterday. It can be in the moment that you are at. And I think weather and is a good example. Where you are is another example. And another piece of feedback that then can be brought into the creation is what has worked before. And I think that having those creative signals is really important. So, Corinne, what have you seen from a creative signals and usage that really stood out to you that others may learn from?
I mean, like I said, it's mostly just about testing. Like you need to start, I think, a little bit broader and then understand obviously what your objectives are for your campaign. And that can really run the gamut. But sometimes the hard part is just getting started, and you need to make sure you're starting in a more general sense and then running testing and just starting from there. Like nobody's going to nail it right away. You need to make sure that you're starting in a more general sense. And then, like I said, leveraging the data that's available to you. And you talked a little bit about the data earlier and just making sure that you're conscious of the actual consumers and what they're looking for. But how should brands be thinking about like how they make the most of the data that is available to them, whether it's in their creative or otherwise?
Yeah, so we very much are advising our customers and where we're seeing our most sophisticated and successful customers are really auditing what are the data sources that they have in their hands from a first party perspective, and how are they leveraging it in new and different ways. Of course, things like retargeting still exists for people who have opted in, but what can you learn from those users that then you can take? What are the signals that they're saying to you? How do you form lookalikes without, proliferating user IDs? There's behaviors, there's locations, there's other things that you can do. Taking the insights that you have from your known data, people who have said, please talk to me in this way, to go out and do some testing. I think it's also important that the environment that you're in can serve as a test. You talked about testing quite a bit, Corinne, and I think that that's what the strongest marketers are doing. Test and learn. I have signals on this percentage of my audience. Once I go and target, when I come back in the end results, was that relevant enough? It was a constant test and learn. It's never learned for long, never stay stagnant, and it is a constant learning agenda. I hear learning agenda, learning agenda, learning agenda all day, every day. And I feel like it used to be, okay, let's do this quarterly, let's see what comes out of it. But what it really is a constant state of learning. And I think for most people who are curious, that's very exciting. But operating in a really agile way to, again, take the data that you have in your hand from either your objectives or your performance or from targeting, expanding upon it. How can I forge partnerships? How can I think about the environment itself as a target, in a way that, contextually things like television have done for a very long time? How can I use those practices and take them more broadly? So I have known data, I have the environment, I have other things about location that I can use. What combination of them, based on this test and learn, provides the highest incremental lift, the incremental return on ad spend, the incremental ROI? And if you're not testing and learning all the time, then you're likely dying. And that's never been more true than now. And you'll find new signals every day, and really shifting from a place where you're data mining on a user level to extract a micro insight, and instead doing mid-sized testing on an always on basis to get your mid-sized insights that are pretty accurate. Actually, I'm seeing better results from that than pulling out micro insights and trying to act on them.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a great point, and it's fair. We talk about testing all the time, all the time. I think that it's the most
Hmm.
important thing, whether it's on the creative side or whether it's the audiences that you're running against. What do you think is the biggest challenge for brands that they have with this mentality of always on testing? Because at least I've noticed there's still this kind of shift where I think brands are getting comfortable with the right testing framework and making sure that they're prioritizing the tests that they're doing, that there's a method to the madness so that they're
Of
actually
course.
understanding like what's moving the needle versus doing a bunch of tests all at once. So what is the biggest challenge that brands are having with this concept of always on testing, and how can they rectify that?
Yeah, so you really need to make sure that you're thinking about it in a short, mid, and long term, and maybe even more increments than that. But there are things you can test in the short term and have signals, that show you what you can change the next day or the future day. Then there's tried and true, which I would say more is short term, like a concept, create a concept you're not gonna like change the creative concept because you won't be able to see that resonance. You won't be able to get your results back in time to say overall the concept isn't working. However, there are changes and elements, as you said, within that you can change on a daily basis. Then you have your overall brand positioning, which, to be honest, doesn't and hasn't changed for a long time in most cases. And I'm not saying you would change it very often, but I think changing every 7 years probably isn't going to work anymore.
Fair.
So I think everything has to move forward. But I think then you have, here's how I test these different things in the mid, short, and long term, though it's maybe on a yearly or 2 yearly basis. They all kind of play into each other. So you've got to get into a place where you agree with your core leadership team and your marketing team Here's what we're going to test it always, always. And always is not like once every quarter. It's always. And then how do you procure those insights? They can't be something that completely transforms within a day. Then how do you come together to review those results and see what are the more macro things we want to test? And you're doing that on a monthly basis. And then reviewing what is your total overall positioning and your target audience strategy on maybe a quarterly to yearly basis instead of every 2 years. You just can't wait that long. And MMM and media mix modeling, market mix modeling, whichever is used, is really great and it should be used more often, but it needs to, the practices around it need to speed up. We can't wait. Consumers aren't waiting. Their behaviors are changing like, and at that moment, if you're not there within a short amount of time, you've really lost that opportunity.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up MMM. I was just about to ask you about attribution and all this talk about testing and making sure that you're doing it all the time, and how brands should be thinking about measuring. Outside of MMM, is there anything that brands should be considering when they're thinking about how they measure all the testing that they're doing and what attribution models they should be looking at?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of brand you are. If you have more offline purchases that drive your business forward, or depending on the cycle that you have on the reads, it really determines what measurement you should use. And so some people are digitally native and have a ton of real time conversion data. They're making budgeting decisions on a weekly basis. Some people lock in their budgets. Used to be yearly, but now is much more quarterly. Um, I would say that in terms of testing, you need to not only wait on MMM, but I said like transform what that means. There are new partners out there that will do MMM that not twice a year and still with high statistical significance. But coming up with your own in-house version, using a partner, or, getting guidance from partners like us is really what needs to be done. Our partners at Meta have great new ways to do measurement that they're testing out, which is fantastic, but it's likely going to be one part of the test. So every single brand needs to have, here's how I'm going to use the native tools, here's how I'm going to use tools like Smartly, here's how I'm going to use my own, here's how I'm going to use another measurement partner to come up with their own recipe for what works for them. So I guess what I'm saying to you, Corinne, is coming up with how you measure is a test in itself. And it should be something that people have already started in light of signal loss. But if not, of course, we can help guide the way. But it's going to be essential to have a test for your measurement and then continue to put pressure on your measurement and make your own recipe that works for you based on the number of signals and conversions and the richness of the data that you have.
Yeah, I actually want to change my answer earlier. I said that reporting was the challenging part for most brands. Attribution is definitely the most challenging part for most brands. So if you're struggling with attribution, don't worry about it. Most brands are, and there are
Everybody.
partners that can help you. Ryan, any closing thoughts, remarks that you think are relevant for any of the brands that are listening today on privacy or data?
One of my favorite things that I've said for quite some time, working in a world of user level data and balancing privacy, is we have to remember that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to say, here's how we're going to use your data. We have a responsibility to incentivize and have that value proposition. We have a responsibility to ourselves and our business to measure often, measure always, test always. And it's a completely different way of working. What worked before is not going to work now. And so you need to take action. And we need to be, again, thinking of people as the human beings that they are. I know a lot of times we talk about CPMs and impressions, but as I say often, impressions don't buy toilet paper, people do. And so it's important that we give the respect as well as put forth the effort to really engage human beings in the way that they would like to, because consumers are in fact intelligent people who want to feel respected and who want to be taken on a journey and to be influenced. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I alluded to it earlier, but I think sometimes we think about like the elusive consumer. We're all consumers. And so oftentimes it's nice to pause and think about I want to be addressed from brands, and then thinking about how you can leverage that in the testing and the work that you're actually putting out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's land this plane. Ice cream in the winter is okay.
Always,
Iced coffee without gloves, not advisable.
probably not.
And definitely get your consumers permission and really be thoughtful in the way that you're engaging and incentivizing. Test all day.
Exactly. Love it. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode of the Outsmart Yourself series. Please stay tuned for our next episode where we dive into the world of AI and automation. To register, visit smartly.io/outsmart or find the link to register in the calendar invite you have for today's event. Thank you so much, everyone.